The reason you procrastinate is fear of who you might become. You recognize this sensation. The exam is tomorrow. Passing isn't optional. Yet there you are, hands on the keyboard, lost in a video game at 3 in the morning. Or maybe a major deadline is closing in. Still, you're scrolling through TikTok, convincing yourself you just need 5 minutes. And somehow, 5 minutes quietly become 3 hours. This is self-sabotage. It's the process of quietly working against your own ambitions. Most of the time, we label it as procrastination, but it also hides in less obvious places, like imposter syndrome. That persistent anxiety that one day you'll be exposed as a fraud. And that fear can push you to undermine the very opportunities you've earned. Here's what matters. These patterns aren't random accidents. They aren't simply happening to you. They are strategies, initiated by you, directed against you. And if this feels familiar, understand something important. You're not an outlier. You're part of the majority. The statistics are striking. Research suggests that between 62 and 82% of people will experience imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. In universities, up to 95% of students admit they struggle with procrastination. Self-sabotage isn't a rare dysfunction. It's embedded in the default settings of the human brain. But it doesn't show up the same way for everyone. Imagine it as a spectrum. On the far right, the red zone, are deeply ingrained, life-disrupting patterns that repeat across situations. Roughly 15 to 20% of adults live in this reality. In some cases, these cycles are connected to neurobiological differences, such as ADHD, which make them especially difficult to interrupt. Most of us, however, somewhere between 60 and 80%, exist in the gray zone. We function well enough. But when the pressure rises, when something truly matters, we begin engaging in behaviors that practically ensure failure. So wherever you fall on that spectrum, the purpose of this video is simple: to help you move left. And to do that, we need to decode the system operating underneath it all. You might be wondering, if this pattern is so common, could it really be built into us? If nearly everyone does it, there must be a reason. We often reduce the brain to a pleasure-seeking device, constantly chasing dopamine. But that's not its primary role. Your brain is first and foremost a prediction engine. Pleasure comes second. From an evolutionary standpoint, its main responsibility isn't your happiness, it's your survival. And survival depends on anticipating what comes next. So the brain builds an internal model of reality. In the past, this model focused mostly on the physical environment. Today, it also includes your identity and your sense of worth. To make this clearer, picture a simple graph in your mind. On the vertical axis sits your competence, your value. Across that graph, your brain draws a horizontal line. This is your internal baseline. It represents the level of ability or safety your brain expects to be true. And the brain's greatest fear, even more powerful than failure itself, is discovering that this baseline is misplaced. When external reality shifts away from that line, a gap appears. This vertical distance is known as a prediction error. To your primitive brain, that gap feels like danger. Self-sabotage, in all its subtle and dramatic forms, is an attempt to close that gap. And it usually unfolds in two distinct ways. The first pathway often appears in people with high but fragile self-esteem. Their internal baseline is set high. It declares, "I am," or "I must be," highly capable. But the external world is unpredictable. Exams, performance reviews, public evaluations, they introduce uncertainty. That uncertainty creates a gap between expectation and reality. So what happens? You avoid letting the data come in. You engage in behavioral self-handicapping. You stay up too late. You drink before an important presentation. You begin the project at the last possible moment. It's a sophisticated defense mechanism. If you fail, you have an explanation. I didn't fail because I'm incapable. I failed because I was exhausted. But if you succeed, the reward is even greater. I succeeded despite the obstacle. I must be exceptional. By deliberately limiting your performance, you shield that elevated baseline from being challenged. The second pathway is more common among those with lower self-esteem. Those who wrestle with imposter syndrome. Here, the internal baseline is set painfully low. It whispers, "I'm not capable. I don't belong. I'm pretending." Then something unexpected happens. You receive a promotion. Someone offers genuine praise. Suddenly, the line of reality rises far above your internal baseline. That surge of success creates a massive prediction error. The world reflects value back to you. But your internal setting insists you have none. And that gap feels dangerous. So you engage in what's known as claimed self-handicapping. Before an important task, you tell others you're exhausted, or unwell, or overwhelmed. Yes, it lowers expectations, but over time, it quietly teaches people to see you as delicate, as unreliable. You exchange long-term growth for short-term emotional safety. You retreat into the familiar discomfort of not good enough because your brain would rather endure predictable failure than risk uncertain success. And here's the frustrating truth. Even when you recognize the pattern, even when you understand exactly what's happening, even when you deeply want to change, why does it still feel impossible? Why can't you make yourself do the thing you logically know you should? Because this isn't only psychological. At its core, it's biological. When that gap appears on the mental graph, your brain's threat detector, the amygdala, may activate. It interprets uncertainty as a threat to your identity. And in that moment, it pushes your rational mind out of the driver's seat. You're now operating in fight or flight mode. Meanwhile, another brain region, the right inferior frontal gyrus, often called the RIFG, is supposed to function as a brake system. It helps you inhibit impulsive reactions. But for those who struggle with self-sabotage, that brake can feel spongy. Weak. It requires far more pressure to engage. So you end up in a terrifying internal dynamic. Panic has grabbed the steering wheel, and the brakes don't respond. It feels like you're speeding toward a cliff without the ability to slow down. The people who eventually break this cycle didn't eliminate fear. They recalibrated their internal baseline to better reflect reality, so the alarm no longer screamed at every opportunity. That's our objective. So how do we get there? Let's simplify this. You don't need an expensive course. You don't need another productivity app. Unless you're in a clinical range that requires medical treatment, most of this rewiring can begin with something simple: a pen and a notebook. We'll use writing as a tool to gently guide the brain back towards safety and control. And we'll do it in 3 steps. Step 1. Take back the wheel. Before you change behavior, you must shift emotional control. When anxiety rises, when procrastination pulls at you, open your notebook. Write exactly what you're experiencing. I feel tightness in my chest. I'm thinking that I'm going to fail. This technique is called cognitive diffusion. When thoughts stay trapped inside your mind, you are fused with them. But when you place them on paper, you separate from them. You move from being the emotion to observing the emotion. You can even name it, or sketch it as a character, like the emotions in the movie Inside Out. Whether you describe it or draw it, the effect is similar. You create space. And even a small gap between you and fear is often enough to remove panic from the driver's seat. Your rational mind can begin steering again. Step 2. Work around the faulty brake. Now that you're back in control of the wheel, there's still a mechanical issue. Your internal brake system is physiologically weaker. Trying to overpower sabotage with pure willpower will only drain you. Instead, we use strategy. Here are 3 tools, each suited to a different pattern. First, if you're a perfectionist frozen by the fear of not measuring up, use what's called the bad draft protocol. This technique relies on paradoxical intention. At the top of the page, write, "For the next 20 minutes, my only goal is to produce the worst, most embarrassing draft possible." By redefining failure as the objective, you remove its threat. Your amygdala stops signaling danger.
Because you can't fail at being intentionally bad. It lowers the barrier to action. And once you begin, momentum often carries you forward. Ironically, what you create usually isn't terrible at all. But by then, the engine is already running. Second, if distraction pulls you away again and again, try the WHOOP method. It stands for wish, outcome, obstacle, and plan. Write down your wish, then clearly describe the best possible outcome. But here's the critical step most people overlook. After identifying the obstacle, write it down clearly. Be honest, even uncomfortable. The real obstacle might be this. The moment I get home, I drop onto the couch and start scrolling. Now, convert that obstacle into a concrete plan using an if-then formula. If I walk through the door, then I immediately place my phone inside a drawer. By mentally rehearsing this sequence, you're programming a response in advance. You preload the choice. So when the moment arrives, you don't debate, you execute. The first 2 tools help you work around the weak brake system just enough to begin. But the third tool is different. This one strengthens the brake itself. It's called urge surfing. Use it when you feel that intense physical impulse, the heat in your body that says escape or check your phone. When the urge appears, don't resist it. Observe it. Take your pen and write, "The urge is at an 8 out of 10. I feel warmth in my face." Wait 2 minutes. Check again. Now it's at a 6. These impulses behave like waves. They rise, they crest, and they always fall, usually within 20 minutes. By staying with the sensation without acting on it, you're performing a repetition in the mental gym. Each time you ride the wave, you strengthen that internal brake. Just as step 1 created distance from emotional fear, this step builds tolerance for physical urges. And the next time you need to pause, it will feel slightly easier. Step 3 is the final and most essential phase, closing the gap. The tools we discussed help in the moment, but lasting change requires recalibrating that internal baseline. We need accurate data from the real world to adjust your expectations to something realistic. We do that through behavioral experiments. Approach it like a scientist. Instead of assuming failure, form a hypothesis. For example, if I share my work before it's perfect, people will see me as incompetent. Now test it. Take a project that isn't even 80% finished. Send it to a trusted colleague or friend for feedback. No excessive polishing, no over-editing, just share it. Then observe. Were you mocked? Or did you simply receive useful input? You're teaching your brain that unfinished does not equal incapable. Once you've gathered this new evidence, it's time to recalibrate your internal line. Use Socratic questioning. When the inner voice says, "I'm incompetent," write it down. Put that belief on trial. Ask, is there truly zero evidence that I'm capable? What about the last project I completed? What about past successes? Force your mind to acknowledge the wins it tries to dismiss. Think of yourself as the defense attorney. You're constructing a solid case for your own worth. And here's a crucial piece of balancing that graph. Redefine what a mistake means. In your notebook, practice reattribution. Instead of writing,
I'm so stupid. I always ruin everything. Right? This is information I can use to improve. When an error becomes data rather than a verdict on your character, the brain stops categorizing it as a threat. The alarm quiets. And without the alarm, the need to self-sabotage fades. Now let's bring it all together. Here's the path out of the cycle. First, regulate the emotions so you can think clearly. Second, work around the unreliable break so you can act. Third, recalibrate your baseline so you stop fighting yourself. It may sound like a lot, but you don't need to master everything today. If you're unsure where to begin, start with step 1. Open your notebook. Write down what you're feeling right now. That's enough. I've also created a free PDF with structured templates for each of these exercises. You can find it through the link in the description. Picture that spectrum again. Maybe today you feel positioned far to the right, but each time you pick up the pen, each time you write out an urge, each time you allow yourself to be imperfect, you move one step to the left. You narrow the gap. You show your brain that reality is safer than it predicted. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about gradually reclaiming control. Thank you for being here. I hope this gave you something practical you can apply immediately. In the next video, we'll explore how this same self-sabotage pattern influences our closest relationships. Until then, take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.